Welcome to the Secrets to Mindful Health podcast, where we explore the hidden truths of wellness in all its forms. From physical and mental health to spirituality, join me, your host, Beth Warren, at Nourished by Beth on Instagram and TikTok, a registered dietitian for over a decade and single mom of 6, as I share my personal journey overcoming challenges towards self-love and wellness. Together with my guests, we will inspire and motivate you to prioritize your well-being and create a life of balance and fulfillment. Let's embark on a transformative journey towards a healthier, happier you. I'm glad you're here. In today's episode, which is called Love Thyself, Nurturing Self-Love, Recognizing the Signs with Corey Latta. In this episode, we will be delving into the essential practice of nurturing self-love. We'll explore how to cultivate a healthy relationship with ourselves and recognize the warning signs that indicate a lack of self-love. You'll learn invaluable insights and practical tips on embracing self-love and prioritizing your well-being. Corey is a writer, educator, and therapist. He holds a PhD in literature and an MA in counseling. He works with couples and families on developing healthy communication, as well as with individuals on inner child work. On Instagram, you can find him at the.literary.therapist. Welcome, Corey.
Thanks, Beth. Good to be here.
So, the reason why I really wanted to have you on and discuss this topic especially is because this is a wellness podcast, and I'm sitting here 3 seasons in telling people what they should be doing when it comes to wellness, or you need to prioritize your self-care, do this, do that, and all the different guests I have with things they do for themselves.
Right.
And I felt like I need to take 12 steps back and recognize that some people don't even feel that they deserve to do things for themselves. What came up with a client this week, and it comes up often in my nutrition practice with clients, was I was speaking to a mom of 3. She has a baby at home with her. She was saying she's in her cycle of eating emotionally where it doesn't make her feel good. And we've been working together a while. And one of the coping skills I help her come up with is like 5 things you can do instead. Let's come up with 5 things that actually make you feel good that you can do instead. She's like, I don't know. This is what's familiar to me. It's what I've always done, but also I don't know what makes me feel good. I don't even know. And we got to find what makes you feel good. And going even deeper than that, some people don't feel they don't deserve to feel good, or they don't deserve a day for themselves. So how do we handle that, Corey?
Okay, big question. Yeah, self-love and self-care and doing what feels good. All right, so let me just sort of say what I think it isn't totally. We typically talk about it in terms of what to do, what not to do. Like we'll equate self-care, which leads to self-love, as like go get a massage, go on a hike, go on a vacation, and all that's really good. And we need to prioritize time for ourselves, activities that make us feel good. I think, though, that self-love and self-care has to be deeper. What we're just talked about with kind of the things we can do, that's sort of top down. And we kind of have to come bottom up sometimes. And bottom up means first sort of identifying true self to me, understanding who I really am, which you mentioned. I do some inner child work with clients. I think a huge part of this is actually inner child work, which we can talk more about. But identifying like, who am I really? And what does it mean to connect to myself? And until I can start being very curious about those questions, I don't know that we can even get to it. I can do stuff that's fun. I can do stuff that feels good. That's not a problem, right? So for some of us, it's a problem because we don't even take enough time to do that. We're sort of doing everything for everyone else. But I can do things that feel good, but I can also, in doing that, miss myself because I've not identified sort of who the self is.
Deeper work there. How do we help people get to see that there's more deeper work? You see, when people come to me, I'm usually like the safe space because I'm just about food, right? People come to me more surface about the food. And
Right.
I'm always like, but typically what they'll express is, I know what to do, I just don't do it. Or
Right.
why can't I stay on anything? But yet they're coming to me just to be told what to eat. Or
Right.
so I'm basically giving you what you keep getting, except that it's not working.
Right.
So they know something more is going on, but are they ready? Or how do you open them up to see that there's something deeper we need to start being curious about in order to
Mm-hmm.
help you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's sort of like if we can't. This happens all the time with identifying feelings. People have a real hard time identifying feelings. So maybe I'll use this as a analog and jump over. So when people, I'll talk about like, okay, there's only so many core feelings. There's anger, there's fear, there's loneliness, there's guilt, there's shame, there's sadness, there's hurt, there's gladness. Um, and I'll say, look, which is it that you're feeling right now? And they can't say. For many people, they can't say. So what I'll do is I'll start at the behavior. So what behavior is problematic for you? Could be eating, could be some sort of a acting out of some kind, addiction. I was like, well, we can actually trace the behavior back to, like, if you're sleeping all the time, right, and you can't get going, that's probably depression, that's probably sadness, right, chronic sadness. If you're isolating, you're not reaching out, and okay, well, we can probably easily trace that back to loneliness. So sometimes we don't know we're feeling, but we can start at the symptom and work back to the feeling. I'd say the same thing with identifying that we need to do deeper work. It's like, okay, look at the parts of your life that you don't feel aligned with, and if you're honest with yourself, don't feel good. You're not proud of. You don't want to continue to do. You feel like maybe you just look at anything that doesn't feel good or feels misaligned, and let's trust that not feeling good or that sense of misalignment or whatever is a bit of a blinking alarm, and it's sort of telling you, hey, there's work to be done. The question then becomes like, what is the deep work? Like, okay, now I know I need to do it. I don't feel good. I feel like I'm hiding. I feel shame. I feel guilt. I feel disassociated, whatever it is. Then the real question is like, what is the deep work? And that becomes tough and different based on people's stories. If someone had a really traumatic childhood, a lot of that deep work is going to look like processing trauma. If someone's story involved a really chaotic family and no one talked about feelings and everyone talked over each other and it was high conflict and high drama and all that. Okay, well, maybe some of that work is going to be breaking codependent patterns and sort of learning to map out who I am apart from this dysfunctional system. It's just going to depend. The nature of that deep work is going to depend on the person and their story. I think it always involves, though, getting back to what I mentioned before, inner child work. I think inner child work is the common denominator in all the deep work. I think it's the universal to be able to get to who the true self is, to then get to what it is I need to do to feel good, to love myself.
Right. So I guess we have to define what is inner child work.
Yeah. So, all right, think about the inner child as well. It becomes really interesting let's do it right now. So, if I were to say, okay, Beth, when you think about yourself as a little girl, little Beth, what age comes to mind?
8.
Yep, it's always 8 for me too. Um, I've heard some people say 6, 7, 5. If there's a major trauma in someone's life, like something really marked a separation between innocence and experience, then they'll always pick an age before that trauma. So, like if a parent died at 6, they'll always say 5, right? But for me, it's 8. Okay, that 8-year-old self knew what it was to love and to receive love, and knew what it was to play and to imagine, and knew what it was to give, and knew what it was to create, and all these things. That's the true self. So inner child work is based on this assumption that your childhood self, pre-trauma, pre-addiction, pre-heartbreak, pre-codependency, pre all the junk we get into in life, right, that's the true self, and that part never goes away. It gets buried and it gets hidden, and we we sort of learn how to compartmentalize and kind of shove that inner child into some hidden invisible closet, but it's always there. So inner child work assumes that there's still a true, loving, receptive, beautiful, imaginative, creative part of me that's the core of who I am, and the work becomes almost like a reclamation project. I have to go and reclaim that true self. It's a rescue mission. I've got to rescue little Corey from the places I've stuck him in all my own dysfunctional relationships and mistakes and addictions or whatever. So Inner child work is the reconnection, the rediscovery and reconnection with the true self.
Is that what we also may consider our most lovable self?
Yes, 100%. Yeah, 1000%. Yeah, yeah. So we we don't. No, it gets all right. So if you got a kid, if you have kids, it becomes a little easier, I think, sometimes because we know what it is to see our kids and like love them and hug them and like we know what it is to attach, and we have to take that same kind of energy and instinct and move it toward our inner child. So I'll tell people, I'll work with clients all the time and say, okay, let's say they were in a really dysfunctional relationship. Maybe there's a pattern of that, but they got kids. And I'll say, okay, no, you've got a 10-year-old little girl. Would you subject that 10-year-old girl to that relationship? Right. Your dog. And they'll always be like, heck no, no way. Not a chance, right? Okay. Well, guess what? You got a 10-year-old little girl in you, right? And she's never not there. And you've subjected her to that relationship over and over and over. So can we start to have enough anger for her, not at her, but for her? Can we advocate for her? Can we develop a relationship with her the same way you want to develop a relationship with your kids, your actual kids? And can you start to sort of carry her wherever you go so that this is really self love to me? So that before I eat that thing or do that thing or engage in that relationship or go to that place or work that job, I ask myself, can I trust you with little Corey? Can I trust you with my true self? And if the answer is, I don't think so, then that is not a loving act or not a loving relationship, not a loving thing to do to myself.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Where do we lose that feeling like we deserve the love? It's still the same question, even along with what you're saying, makes it even more poignant of a question. Where do we stop feeling like we lost it or we don't deserve to go back to it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough because we're not aware of it when it happened. Now, some of us are. Some of us can say, "Oh, there was a moment." I remember, my parents divorced when I was 12, and it was a very traumatic thing. And I can't pinpoint the moment, though I can pinpoint a couple of moments where my true, innocent, loving self just got murdered. I mean, like, boom, breaking point right here. So I can pretty well identify like when I lost that loving connection with myself. But sometimes we can't. Sometimes it just comes from the gradual experience of living in a disconnected house, right? Where no one really talks about feelings. No one shows what's going on inside of them. So there's not intimacy, like intimacy. There's not that. And that's a traumatic thing. Like we don't talk about that enough. That's trauma. Like if you can't show up honestly in safety, right, with your caretakers and your siblings, um, where's that true self going to go? I mean, it's not going to show, he or she is not going to feel safe to show up. So she's going to go into hiding. He's going to go into hiding. So you might not be able to pinpoint the moment where you lost that loving connection or you said, I'm not worthy of that love, but it came on you gradually and overtook you. And then life just becomes about surviving. So this is the thing. You can't live a life of self-love or connection with your true self if you're in survival mode. And we go into survival mode very early, depending
Hmm.
on our stories. And we call it life. It's just life. Like, but it's not.
Right.
It's not. It's just surviving.
And do you feel most people can only do that for so long? Like they'll hit a.
Oh, a 1,000. Yeah. So, what's been deemed the midlife crisis, most all psychologists, think about people like James Hollis, who wrote The Middle Passage. He talks about, been greatly influenced by his work. Carl Jung talks about this. Every psychologist and literary figure, we all point to this common experience we call the midlife crisis, which is, a period in your 30s, 40s, whatever, in which you realize it's not working anymore. Like it's not working. Like what I was taught and how I thought I had to live and the ways in which I hid myself, I'm going to die if I keep doing it. And listen, people do die. I mean,
Hmm.
right? Like suicide partly is an expression of this hopelessness coming from a sense of disconnection with the self.
Hmm.
Um, so it's going to be an addiction. It's going to be a life collapse. It's going to be some sort of self sabotage. It's going to be a crisis of some sorts, either of your own making or something that befalls you, and it's going to wake you up. But not everyone listens to the call of the midlife crisis. But if you do, and it can come before this, but if you do, then I think what the summons is of whatever that crisis is or that wake up call is, can you reconnect with your true self? Can you reconnect with who you really are? And maybe not reconnect, maybe connect with for the first time. I mean, maybe you don't even have a memory of being that
Right.
little child, but it just doesn't work anymore the way you're doing life, and then you have to make a choice.
Right. You see, I feel like my mission here, and even in this podcast, is to catch it for people before it becomes like a rock bottom moment.
Right.
How often do you feel it has to sort of be that for some people? How realistic is it to feel that they might hear something? I feel that if I heard something that just sparked something in my head of, wait a second, that sounds familiar. What's that about? It would have given me a significant change. I think I would have been open enough to recognize something made sense about someone else's story. Actually, that is a little bit what happened with my divorce, is a friend sharing hers, totally unrelated to me, and hearing something very similar that wasn't sitting well with me already. It was, I was denying things in my head, and when I heard it from a friend, I was like, wait a second, that's a thing, you know?
Mm,
So I'm just wondering how to help people help themselves
yeah.
without getting to that rock bottom moments.
Yeah. I don't think it has to be, I don't think it has to come from hitting bottom, but I'm one of those hard headed people where it definitely took bottom. And I know a lot of people for whom it definitely took hitting bottom, but I don't think it has to be that. I think if you're conscientious and connected and observant, you can notice what's going on in you. You could, in the same way that let's say your knee starts aching, right? And it's like, something's off there. Well, there are some of us who will like,
Ignore it.
big
Yeah.
deal. And then all of a sudden your, ACL blows out or something.
Yeah.
But there's some of us who are like, I need to go, that ache tells me something, I need to go. And that sounds like maybe that was your experience, which I'm like, God bless, because that is the better path.
Mhm.
You'd rather start to get some PT for that knee before it blows than try to recover from ACL surgery or something like that. So if you're again conscientious and aware, something is not quite right here. Again, we can use the word alignment, and that not rightness is telling me I got to make a move, or I got to get investigative, right? What's going on? And you
Yeah.
can look at other people's. This for sure I've done. You can look at other people's stories, people around you, family members, right? I remember, you know, like substances, drinking, drugs, never been a thing for me. I've had plenty of other vices, but that's never been a thing. Um, Not tempted in the least, never have been. Well, here's why. On one side of my family, it's just addiction, overdose, death, addiction, overdose, death, addiction, overdose, death. And I remember even being a kid and then a teenager who was into fitness and all that, like, no way. I'm not I'm not going that route. That's not what I need at all. That's not, so we can sort of see the pitfalls that others fall into and like, that's not loving me. I'm going to go a different path. And like, that's to be preferred rather than
Right.
falling into that same hole.
Yeah. I still think this conversation circles back into self love and recognizing that, to trust yourself, something's wrong, and that you can choose another way, or you can choose to explore that in something supportive. It's, well, I know that I ignored a lot because of that work I didn't do, that you were saying about inner child work and finding all that. I didn't feel myself in all that. I didn't feel like, uh, that I guess I didn't feel self love then, because it was, signs were there, and it's amazing how much you just keep going without getting in tune. That's what my question is. How do we help
Right.
people get more in tune with themselves and to stop? See, I
Yeah.
built my life more in a distraction. I people will laugh because they still look at me and I still look super busy because I don't know how to not be busy. I love the things I do in my life. But that was how I built my life on purpose. I didn't want to be home. I wasn't home. I wanted constant. I was always looking to the next thing. I recognized I wrote 2 books. I had children. Like I have like 10 years that were literally a blur in my brain. I can't even remember a lot of it because everything was for the next thing. Um, and I had a moment later that I realized I'm not enjoying the moments of my life. Like what's going on? I don't remember writing my book. Like I don't remember the feeling of how good it felt in my book launch party. Like it was for some reason it was the books for me
Mm-hmm.
because it's such an accomplishment and it was a blur. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously the children, a lot of it was a blur. So I would love to try to help people because obviously I didn't know how to become more in tune with themselves to check in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. So if I had to bullet point some of the, I don't know, key ways to know, one is you need a mirror, right? And we are not our own, we're not very good mirrors to ourselves. So you need to be talking to somebody. I'm just I need people to sort of tell me what their experience of me is. And I need people, whether it be a trained professional or a very intuitive person that's close to me, I need a tribe or at least a therapist to be able to say, I'm noticing some things. Let me bring this to your attention. Otherwise, I'm very likely not. We are oftentimes poor interpreters of our own experience. And I need someone to say, I'm curious about this, or I noticed something that's going to help me catch what's going on in me long before it becomes a real problem. So that's one thing I'd say. The other thing is like, I mean, you know, taking stock of your story and kind of understanding where you come from and who you come from and being able just to, I mean, even if it's like journaling, like being able to sort of make sense of like, well, who am I and who do I want to be? What are my belief system? What's my beliefs? And look at my relationship history and all that. Like that's huge. And I don't think, because again, self love can't just be, well, I'm really stressed. I work a lot. Let me go on a walk. That is not, I mean, that's sort of a bit of a band-aid on the existential like gunshot wound. Like, yes, do that. You got to do that. I started doing yoga. This is a good example. All right, so I started doing yoga really hard and heavy back in January. Um, well, it came out of an intensive I did, this sort of therapeutic intensive, was kind of on inner child work, where there were only 2 sessions, only like 2 hours out of a whole week, where we did trauma informed yoga. And I had never done yoga in my life, maybe once. And there was something there that it felt good physically, but there was also something there like, I, I can tell that this is getting at something I have not gotten to before. So then I started doing it in January, and I've done it faithfully all year. So it's this combination of I know it's good for me physically. It is going on that walk, right? It is going to the spa. It is that massage. Yoga is good for you, right? So that's good. But because of my awareness from being in therapy, from talking to people close to me, reading books, listening to podcasts, trying to be self aware, taking an inventory of my life, the top down good thing of going to a yoga session, a hot yoga session, met my all the work I had been doing, and
Mm-hmm.
it created this discipline where I'm like, oh, this is it. I remember being in yoga for the first 2 months. We would sort of get to the end of our time, and we would do shavasana, where you're just sort of laying there, right? It's kind of cool. I would just start crying. I had no idea why. I had no idea why. I just would burst into tears in the dark, laying on this mat, like, what is happening to me?
Is it
Well,
hot in here? Yeah.
yeah, it was in more than one way,
Right.
right?
I know.
So like it was this combination of I actually was doing something that was good for me in my body. That's really important. But I don't think it would have activated everything that needed to be activated in the same way had I not started doing the work and asking people to come into
For
my life
sure.
and being honest, right?
Yeah.
That to me, self love. And the last thing I'd say too about self love, I don't know why we always think it needs to be easy or feel good, right?
Mm.
I don't think that's the case at all. Like self love is usually doing, to me, should be doing hard things. Like it's, hey, I would love to, and I do this sometimes. I would love to get a pack of double stuffed Oreos and just pound them, right?
Right.
Or whatever, right? That's not good for me. It's harder to eat well. It's harder to eat clean. It's harder to go on that run. It's harder to go to yoga than it is just to sit on the couch.
Yeah.
And yet the loving thing to do for myself is the harder thing almost always.
I am obsessed with that. I'm using it in everything. I totally get what you're saying. So, like, because obviously I think in food. So, I mean, I think in yoga too, by the way, obsessed with hot yoga, the best.
Yeah.
Um, but okay, the double stuffed Oreos that I don't want to use the word restriction, but the stopping yourself from going overboard,
Right.
like the finding that moment of, wait, if I take this step further, I still think it comes back to making you feel good because you still feel empowered by that feeling
Right.
that you didn't go overboard that then wouldn't make you feel bad. But I get what you're saying, that in that moment it doesn't feel good
Yeah.
per
So
se.
there's this great talking about maybe this is a good callback. So talking about identifying emotions. There's a difference between joy and happy, right? Happy is sensual. Like ice cream makes me happy.
Me
Um,
too.
like riding a roller coaster may make somebody happy. Like happy typically is this fleeting thing that I feel when something sensual happens, right? Activate. Joy is deeper.
Hmm.
Like you can be in great pain and still have joy. A good workout will bring you there. Like childbirth isn't happy in terms of how it feels, but it's full of joy, right? So it's
Mm,
like eating the Oreos certainly makes me happy, but it doesn't bring me joy. I don't feel good about myself if I've gone too far. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, hey, you know what?
hmm.
Eat some Oreos, whatever. But I used to turn to that kind of stuff to not feel,
Mm.
and it would momentarily make me happy sensually, but it would not bring me joy. It brings me more joy to do something that I know is loving to myself and my body than it is to just make myself fleetingly happy. You know,
Yeah, I totally feel that still. And that also, like you said, goes full circle into understanding emotions and how do I identify them.
right, right,
I think people have to give themselves some space. So you mentioned a walk. So maybe it's not the walk per se, but recognizing that they have to give themselves moments, even in every day, that allow them to be alone,
yes, yes,
which is
yes,
very hard, especially for moms and moms in my community. They are never alone. You're never, even when you're alone, you're not alone. You just feel all the spirits around you of somebody barging in. Um,
right,
but I suggest things like I really trained myself to wake up earlier. Like literally it took training and those 20 minutes alone, but awake, not sleeping. You see, right? Then we just want to go to sleep when we're alone, but awake alone,
right,
sleep's great too. But I think it's really important to have time alone. And a lot of people feel guilty about that or
yeah.
weird about it.
Yeah, and that's
Or
interesting too, right? It's like, okay, because when you were a kid, here's back to the inner child stuff. Uh, as a kid, you may go off by yourself and go in your room and play or go outside. That kid never feels weird about being alone. It's just an unashamed, like, well, this is what I want to do. This is okay. Like, I want to go climb in this tree or whatever else, like
true.
kids love to do with other kids. But kids who learn how to play by themselves, like, there's never like, should I be doing something else? They're
Right. Or this feels weird. Why am I alone right now?
Yeah, that's true self. Like that's true self stuff.
Yeah.
So it's an act of love to get back to a place of like, I want to be alone because it's good to be alone sometimes. Not isolating, right?
Hmm.
The discipline or the practice of just being with myself. That's all. Just being with myself.
Yeah. Yeah. That 8-year-old Beth used to wander around the backyard just playing with like fireflies.
There you
That
go.
was my jam.
That's it. Yeah.
I I I, I know, and I feel like people would like to blame being alone because it just feels weird. Like you should always have people around you. Like this is weird. I feel
Right.
like that's a little bit of a cop out because I know now that what comes up for me when I'm alone is stuff,
Yeah.
and it's a lot
Yeah.
because you have the space and it's just you. Same thing thing I hear people why people don't like yoga. It's like, oh, I don't want to sit with my thoughts. Like, I don't want to hear my thoughts. My mind's too busy. I'm like, but that's the
Right.
point. That's the
Oh,
point.
that's why I started crying. I mean, that was it. I had not at any time. I never let myself get to that place. I never let myself in my body lay perfectly still and
Yeah.
try to be with my thoughts. And there was so much coming up for me because I finally gave myself some margin to let it come up. You know.
Yeah. I always tell people that, like, the bravest thing they can do is go deeper inside themselves or be alone with themselves.
Right.
It's scary, but it's um, filled with love. So
Yep.
opposite place of fear is love. So,
Right.
all right. If we have to leave people with a message based on today, what kind of message will you leave everyone with?
Hmm. I struggle being succinct. Uh, it would be okay. Self love can't just be top down. It can't just be doing comfortable things. As a matter of fact, it might be doing really uncomfortable things. That might be the greatest act of love that you can step into. And self love has got to be investigative, and it's got to somehow orient with the true self. It's got to be about connecting to the true self in some way for it not to miss who it is we're trying to love, the true self. So it's got to be a little bit deeper than, mere practice.
Oh, that was pretty succinct. I was waiting for you to go on.
Good.
I was there with you. Okay. Well, thank you so much for all your thoughts. I felt it. So if I felt it, I hope other people did.
Yeah,
And
good.
recognizing that self love is the basis, the baseline necessity in order to then give yourself self care.
Right.
You need to
Yeah.
self love to self care. Self is the common word.
Right.
So how can people find you? How can they work with you? What's your Instagram again?
So Instagram is the literary therapist. It's the literary therapist. That's probably the best way. Find me on Instagram. I've got a website coming and all that, and it'll be linked up. But yeah, that'd probably be the best way. And they can just message me for any individual work. I work with individuals all over the place. I'm going to be starting some groups, some process groups as well. So yeah,
Okay, great. Well, thanks for coming on.
thanks for having me.
Don't forget to hit subscribe. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Nourished by Beth, or watch and subscribe on YouTube at Secrets to Mindful Health.